In this video, we are going to be building this wish list over here. This will be to track and manage our favorite destinations. This will be done using React and TypeScript, and we will first off create two separate cards in here. The first card will fetch a list of locations that we will fetch from the JSON placeholder API. Once we click on a location, this will then add to our favorite destinations, and we have that in our list over here. We can add multiple, and if we press again, it will remove it from our destination list. Also, if we click the minus button on our favorites list, it will then remove it from our favorites. This will be a continuation of the previous video that we have created for the hotel dashboard. This section will be the wish list so that we can track our favorite destinations. The tech stack will be React and TypeScript, and then once we have created our wish list, we will then add some unit tests in with Jest and React testing library. We will be covering some key concepts in this build with React, and then this can be transferable in real world applications also. Okay, so if I open my application, first off, I'm going to create a destinations route. So if I just copy the route over here, and just underneath, I'm going to render a path for slash destinations, and then this will render the destinations component, which we will create. So in my components folder, I'm just going to create a new folder in here named destinations. And then in the destinations folder, I'm going to create a new file named index.tsx. And then I'm going to do RFCE for my React functional snippets. And then this will be named destinations. So now if I go back into my app.tsx and import this destinations component and now save all, what I also need to do is run npm start. So npm start and open a new port as we have the completed one already open. So I'm just going to create a new tab in here, and then I'm going to then navigate to the / destinations and press enter. So now we have our destinations component rendering on our / destinations route. So now if I go into my destinations component, what I now want to do is fetch some data from an API. So we are using the JSON placeholder API, and we will be getting the city from each object in this array, and then we will be rendering that out in our React application for our trending destinations card. And then what we want to do is when we click add, a toast message appears. So we will be using the React hot toast package. And also if we go into our app and remove, this will then remove from our favorites also. So first thing we need to do is create these cards and fetch the data. So if I go into here, I'm going to create a few pieces of state. First piece of state is going to be the loading state, and this is done with React use state. So const and then is loading and set is loading. And what we are going to do is set is loading to true. So this is equal to use state of true, like so. And if we just import use state from React also, so what this means is if it is true, when we load our application, what we want to see first off is page is loading. This is because we are fetching data from the API, and once that has resolved, then we will render our component. So going back into our browser here, before my return, I'm just going to say if and then an if statement. So this is a guard clause. So if is loading is true. So if we just do if is loading, which it equates to true, then we want to just return a p tag, and inside this p tag it will just say loading dot dot dot. And now if I save, as you can see, it just says loading here. If loading was false, then we will render destination. So I'll just put in down for the opposite of loading, so it will be false, and then we will see our destinations. So now what we want to do is we want to fetch the data. So we have the endpoint here. So if I just copy this, so to fetch data in React, what we do is we have a use effect, and in the use effect we have an async function to fetch the data. So what I'm going to do is get a use effect snippet. So this is from React, and we will also import this in also. And then I'm going to declare a URL. So const URL is equal to what we just copied from the browser here, and then we just need to put it in a string for now. And now what I want to do is create a async function. So I'm just going to say const fetch data is equal to async and an arrow function here. And inside this fetch data, we are going to do a try catch block. So try in here and then the catch block also, passing in the error and returning whatever is in the error. So in our error block, what we are going to do is first off do an if check to say if error is the instance of, because we are using TypeScript, instance of error. Then we want to render the error.name. So console log err.name. Otherwise, it's going to be an unknown error. So I'm just going to put else and console log again. This is an unknown error. So now if I save, we have the catch block handled. If I hover over the ERR in our catch block, as you can see here, the error is unknown. So first off, what we want to do is check for the instance of the error. If that is true, then we will console log the name of the error. Otherwise, we don't know what the error is going to be. So therefore, we would console log this is an unknown error. So now in my try block, I'm going to create a constant, so const of response, and this is going to be equal to await, and we are going to be using the fetch API for this project. So fetch, and in here we will pass in the URL that we have defined above. So that's what we are fetching. So once we fetch this URL, we then get a response back. So a chain in a dot then, and in the dot then we get a callback. So I'm just going to return the response and convert the response to response.json like so. So now all I need to do is underneath, I'm just going to console log our response. So console log response, and then see what we get back from the API. And for now, what I'm going to do is in this remove the second and third. So an empty dependency array would mean that on the first initial load, when the component mounts onto the page, we then fetch the data. We are not getting anything back because we have declared the function, but we are not calling it straight after. So if I just copy this, and after this function here, I'm just going to immediately invoke fetch data. So now if I save, we now have an array of objects in here from the API fetching all of the data correctly. So now what I need to do is create some piece of use state to have handled this response with. So if I just copy is loading, and this now will be data and set data. So initially what we want to do is in the initial piece of state, we want to have an empty array like so. And then when we get our response, what we want to do then is set the data to this response over here. So instead of the console log now, I'm just going to set data to our response that we are getting back from the API. And once we get the set data response back, what we also want to do is set is loading to false. This is because we have now fetched the data from the API. So set is loading to false. So now if I save, and outside of this use effect, just after it, I'm just going to console log what data is this time to see if our data is being set when our component mounts. So if I save, as you can see here now, our data is being set in state. So now the use effect is working correctly. We could carry on, but I want to further enhance this use effect, in particular the fetch request. What we want to do is return a cleanup function just in our return block over here. So I'm going to be using the abort controller from JavaScript. This is so that we can intercept the request from the API and cancel it anytime. So by sending the signal in the fetch, it will destroy the fetch immediately. So what I want to do is in my try block, I'm going to create a constant. So const of controller is equal to new abort controller from JavaScript. And this abort control has a few properties on there. So what I want to do is destructure the signal property from here. So const, and the best way to destructure is to get your curly braces here, and what we need from the controller is the signal. So if we destructure signal, which is equal to the controller that we have specified above. So now we have access to the signal here. I'm just going to pass this in as a second argument in our fetch request. So in object brackets, I'm just going to paste in the signal like so. So now that we are passing in the signal as a second argument to our fetch, what this means is we can then keep track of our fetch request to the API so that in our return block we can do a cleanup function. So because we have now attached the signal here, we also have access to other properties within the controller. So what I'm going to do is in our return block, add a cleanup function in here. So cleanup the abort controller, and this will be controller dot abort. So this will abort the request. And what I also want to do is move this above the fetch data so we have access to it in our return block also. And I'm just going to add a little comment in here to explain what is going on. So essentially, it allows us to intercept an API request so we can cancel anytime. Sending signal in fetch will destroy the request immediately. So now what we could do is in our catch block also, we could check if the error.name is equal to the abort error, then we know that the API request has been cancelled. So I'm just going to console log this also. So API request has been cancelled. Now if I save, that is our use effect complete. So now we are getting our data. What we need to do now is render the data into our cards like this over here. So now that we are receiving our data from the API, I now want to render a flight card like the one here. So first thing I'm going to do in my return block is create a div with a h2 inside, and this one will be named trending destinations. So now save, and I also want to give this div a class name of flight card like so, and then we will style this later on. And what we want to do is render a UL, an unordered list, so bullet points of all of the cities we are getting back from the API. So underneath here, render a UL, and inside the UL, we want to render a list of LIs. So first off, what we want to do is get the data and map through it so we get individual cities. So if I go into here, we can now access the address in the response, and then we can access the city over here. So what I'm going to do is, because we are mapping through data, we need to put in JSX brackets. So we want to first of all check if there's a length in the data. So data dot length, meaning that it's not an empty array. And then we also want to do data and optional chaining, which means if data is there, then we want to dot map. So with the map method, what happens is it goes through each item in the array, and then it renders out whatever we put in. So in this case, we will be rendering out LIs that contain the city name in here. So data.map, and then in the data.map we have callback, and we want to implicitly return. So this is where the parentheses come in, and press enter. So for each item in here, we now want to return or render an li tag, which is here, and this will be named item.address.city like so. So in curly braces here, we want to access the item.address.city and close them off. And now if I save, we are now getting a TypeScript error, so we will address this in a moment. But if I close this error, we are now getting the list of all of the cities in this array. So that should be 10 in total. What I also want to do is for each LI, I want to give a key, and the unique identifier for this key will be the item.id. So now if I save, we now have the types rendering on the page. What I also want to do is add in a button for each li that we render straight after, and this button will just be the plus, like so. So now if I save, we also need to wrap these two children into a div, so a parent container. So I'm just going to do that now and move these ones up. And once we map through each item, we're going to create a div and pass in the li and the button inside. So now if I save, that should be all working correctly. I also want to move the key up into the div now, as that is the parent in this block. I want to also give it a class name, as we will be styling each row equal to the destination. And now I want to save, and that should be all working correctly. What I now want to do is bring in my style. So if I go into index.css and scroll right to the bottom and just paste in my styles here, these will be available also in the repository link on the description. So now if I save, we now see that the styling is working correctly. All I want to do now is remove these TypeScript errors. So if I hover over this, it says property address does not exist on type never. So essentially what we need to do is we need to create a structure for our data. So this is what we are going to be expecting from the API, meaning this structure over here. So as you can see, the address is an object that contains city and the geo and so on. I have already created this. So if I go into my types folder, I'm just going to create a new file in here named flight.ts. And in here, I'm going to paste in my interface. So if I just copy this and paste it in, essentially what it's saying is we are declaring a flight type. So this is what we are expecting from the API as a structure back. The ID will be a number, the name will be a string, and so on. The one we are interested in is the city, which will be a string also. So now that we have created this flight type, I'm just going to copy this now and go back into my destination component. And at the top here, where we are declaring the data, I'm just going to add in the flight type in here. So the flight type is at the minute an object. So if I just import the flight type from our types folder, there is going to be an error. So what we need to do is flight type at the minute is an object. So now after the flight type, if we just add array brackets here, so now this should remove all the TypeScript errors. So now if I save all, we now have no TypeScript errors on here. So that's working correctly. And now we are rendering the trending destinations page. So this is being fetched from the API, and we are rendering the cities for each object within this array. So now what we need to do is render this code again. So because it is the exact same component, what we want to do now is extract this div here and create our own reusable component. So essentially there are a few things that we could reuse. So that will be the UL, the H2 and the div. The children inside will be different because we will have two different arrays that are mapping through each other. So we will keep this one in here, and essentially what we are wanting to do is create a higher order component which wraps around what we are mapping through. So the way to do this is in the components folder, I'm just going to create a new file in here, and I'm going to name this flightcode.tsx, and then I want to do tsrfce, as we will be receiving props for this component. So now this will be named iProps, and what we want to pass into this component is a title and also children. So this will be almost like a wrapper of the code that we are creating. So everything inside will be passed in as children. So if we define the interface of iProps, and this is going to contain the title and children. So the title we know will be a string, so we'll pass that in now. And then the children, this will be a React node. So the way to do this is react.react node, like so. So now all we need to do is go back into here and copy everything across and paste it in. And where we have the data being mapped, instead of that now, all we do is render the children. So essentially, when we wrap the children around with flight code, we then can reuse this component again and again. So now the H2 is going to be the title that we pass in. Now if I save, that is our component complete. It still has the same class name of flight code. All we need to do now is copy this flight code and go into here. And instead of this being wrapped around the object that we are mapping over, what we want to do is paste in the flight code like so. And then this will take in a title prop. So title is equal to a string, and this is the trending destination like so. So now all we need to do is move this up one level and delete the UL from here and the div also. And we need to import the flight code that we have just created. So now if I save all, we have now created a reusable component. So I can now do this twice. So if I copied this and put it underneath, we also need to do a JSX element to wrap the two children inside. So now you can see here we are reusing this same component of flight code, passing in the children. So this second one will have a p tag of nothing added to your list yet. So if I just bring that in and paste and save, as you can see here now, it says nothing added to your list yet. And what I also want to do is change the title. So I want to name this my destination list. Now if I save, we have the two cards rendering on the page, and I'm just going to close down our console for now. So now that is rendering and the styling is complete. All we need to do now is when we click onto each button here, we then want to add our items into our my destination list, and we will do that next. So now what we need to do is when we click on a city, we then want to pass in the entire object that it is contained within into our destination list. So therefore what we need to do is create a second array just at the top. So similar to data, this one now will also be the same as flight type. And I'm just going to rename the data to favorites. So this is our favorites list and set favorites like so. So now I want to essentially create a add flights function. So I want to delete this console log now. So just above is loading, I'm going to create a new function called add flights. So const add flights is a function, and this function is going to take in an individual object of a flight. So this will be the flight, and the type of flight that we pass in is going to be the flight type. So we've already imported this from our types folder. And now all I want to do is in here, I want to console log the flight that we are passing in. So now all I need to do is call this function when we click onto a row or a button. So in data.map, for each div, we have a key and a class name. So underneath the class name, I'm going to have an on-click event. So this is where we pass in the add flight function. So in here, we want to pass in the item that we are mapping over. So this will be unique to each row that we pass in the li and the button. So add flights, and we want to pass in the item that we are mapping over. So this will be an object. So in here now, we want to console log the flight. So now if I save and inspect the page and go into our console, and if we click on Gwenborough, as you can see here, an object is being passed into the add flights function. So if we expand, we now have access to all of the properties in this object. So all I want to do is add this into our new favorites array. So going up here, adding it into this array here. So in our add flights function, I'm just going to space this out a little bit. I want to do an if else check. So if the favorites includes the flight that we are passing in, then we want to set favorites to whatever is in the favorites at the minute. So if there are other items in there, then what we want to do is use ES6 spread in here. So I want to create a new array in set favorites, spread whatever is in the array currently. So favorites like so. And then we also want to add the flight in here. So essentially what we are doing is if favorites include the flight, then we want to remove it. So I want to negate this. So essentially, if favorites does not have the flight that we are passing in here, then we want to add it in. Otherwise, so else, we want to do the same again. So set favorites, and this time again, we are passing in the whatever is in the favorites, so spreading it. So favorites like so, but this time we are going to filter out the one that is in. So if we've already got one inside, we're going to find it and then remove it from this array. So favorites.filter, and for each item in here, so for each item, what we want to do is return only the items that are not equal to the flight that is passed in. So item that is not equal to the flight that we are passing in. So now if I save, that is our add flights function complete. What I want to do now is render this into our destination list over here. So going down further on in here, what we want to do is, first of all, we want to check the length for favorites. So if favorites has a length and that is true, we want to first off render the mapped data in here. Otherwise, we want to return this p tag that we created before. So if we just bring that up here, and in favorites.length, we want to run favorites question mark for optional chaining dot map, and for each item in here, so for each item we want to implicitly return an li tag again and the button. So I'll just bring these in, so similar to what we have over here. So I'm just going to copy this and bring it in underneath. And now if I save, so now if I click on South Elvis, we now are getting it in our destination wish list over here. If I was to click on it again, it will then remove it also. So now what I want to do is when I click into this row here, I want to only remove this from our list. So first thing I need to change is change this from a plus to a minus, like so. And then for this on click now, I want to create a new function, and this will be named remove flights. So this is what we need to create now. So again, remove flights takes in a flight, so similar to the add flights function just above. So in here, I'm just going to open this a little bit, and this will be const remove flights takes in a flight. So we're passing in a flight object, and if that is equal to the flight type, so I'm just going to copy this across. Then what we want to do in this function is remove this flight from the favorites array. So all we want to do is set favorites to favorites.filter. For each item, we want to return the item that is not equal to the flight that we pass in to the remove flights function. So essentially what we are doing is copying what we have above and just pasting that into here also. So now if I save all, so now what I want to do is on Gwenborough, if I click here, we now get Gwenborough, and if I click again, it now removes it from the list. If I was to add a few items in here, so now we have a few in here, and I just click on one, this will remove it from our favorites array. And again, this will remove this from our favorites array. And if we keep doing it, favorites array now will be empty. So if it is empty and there is no length in favorites, then we will show the else block, which is nothing is added to your list. So this pattern here that we are using here of toggling something across, this can be used in multiple applications and real world examples. You could also add this feature into a shopping or e-commerce website where you would add a product to your basket. So if you would imagine this was your basket and I am adding in products in here, and then all I could do is click on here to remove from my basket. So this functionality is quite common in React applications and in websites in general. So if you can practice in your own time and create your own e-commerce website with a basket, and you would add your products into the basket, this would work perfectly fine. The two functions that we have declared, so add flights and remove flights, could be named add product and remove product, but the functionality remains the same. So now what I want to do is implement this toaster from React Hot Toast. So if we click on Get Started, all we need to do is copy this npm install React Hot Toast. So I'm just going to kill my terminal and install this package. So essentially what we want to do is import the toaster from here. So if we go down, we need to have a toast.success of successfully created or successfully added your flights. So that's what we will do in the add flights function, and the same for the remove flights function also. So now if I start my application once again, I now want to add the toast so that the user can visually see that they have added or removed their flight from their destination list. So if I go into the function of added flights, so I want to return toast.success of added to favorites in here. So we need to import this from React Hot Toast. So I'm just going to copy my import that I have. And if we scroll to the top and paste this in, so essentially we are importing the toast from React Hot Toast. What we need to do is create this component or copy it across. So if we go to toaster, we now have a toaster here that we need to render in our application. So what I'm going to do is copy this, and then just in our render block here, just above the flight cards, I'm going to paste in our toaster. This toaster you can adjust, so you have the position, the reverse order, a few other properties that we can edit. So you can have a class name, the duration that we want, the background, the color, success timings and the themes, and so on. So now if I save and now go into my app and I click on Gwenborough, we now have a success message saying added to favorites. So all we need to do now is if we toggle back, we don't have anything there. So I'm just going to bring in my other success message for removed from favorites. So in here in the else block, removed from favorites like so. And then I also want to paste this in the remove flight function also. So now if I save and add a few items in our list, and if I was to toggle back, it says removed from favorites, added back to favorites, and in my wish list over here, if I click again, it removed from favorites and removed from favorites again. So this package is quite good for your user experience, so I would recommend adding it to your app. So all that is left to do now is we're going to test this application. So we will be adding unit tests in next. Okay, so now that we have the favorite list complete, what we now want to do is introduce the unit tests so that our code is robust and tests for functionality of the application. So in our destinations folder, I'm going to create a new folder within here named underscore tests. And in here, I'm going to create a new file saying index.test.tsx, like so. So what I want to do is bring in a few of my imports first of all. So I'm importing React from React. We will be using render, screen, and wait for from React testing library. We will also be importing our component from the same folder above, and also the user event. So when we click on a button, we want to test the functionality for that as well. So what I want to do is create a describe block in here. So describe like so, and this will be named destinations. And in here, what we want to do is create an after each. So this will mean that after each render that we do, we want to do a cleanup. So after each takes in a callback, and in this callback, we want to run jest.clearMock. So jest dot, and then we have access to a few properties from jest. So jest.clear all mocks like so. And then I'm just going to put a comment in here saying cleanup on exiting. So this is after everything is done. So for each test, we want to do a cleanup. So now that's out of the way, we want to run our tests. So we want to do a test block. And this first test is going to check for the on initial load, the loader is displayed. So that's when we load the page, we want to see the loading text. So in here, what I want to do is first of all render my component. So render and this is from testing library. And then in here, we want to render the destinations. So we want to render this component over here. So now if I save, we have two tests passing because the destinations component is now rendering on the page. So now what we want to do is get access to the loading text. So const of loader is equal to screen dot get by text, and this is going to be case sensitive, so it doesn't matter what the case is, upper or lower. So forward slash, and this time it's going to say loading because that's what should be loading initially, and then we want to do a slash I here, and after this we want to expect that the loader is in the document, so expect loader to be in the document. Now if I save, this loader is now in the document, and to test that this is true, if we do a .not before, so this means that we should not have the loader in the document. So now the test should fail if I save, and as you can see it fails, and if I hover over, it does say here it found the text of loading inside, so we now just need to remove this from here. And now I'm just going to copy this and run another test underneath. And now this test is going to render the trending destinations list. So I'll just bring that in here. So now what we are doing is when we render destinations, there is a period initially where the loading text appears. So what we want to do is we want to do an async function this time because we are fetching data, and when that promise has resolved, we then have access to our API data. So we just need to wait for that to happen. So once we render our destinations this time, we want to first of all pass in async here in our test block, and we want to get access to the role of list, so get access to the LIs. So instead of the loader this time, I also want to test for the trending destinations list to be in the document. So that is the initial list of all of the cities. So const trending destinations is equal to screen dot get all by role. So this it means that we are getting it by the role. So for a UL, the default role is a list. So if we get by all by role of list, and we want to access the first list, so this will be the index of 0, like so. And now what we want to do is expect the trending destination to be in the document. If we just copy this and paste it in, and I'm just going to delete this because this is not needed. And if I now save, this test has now failed because if we hover over it, as you can see here, it's still showing as loading, because initially what happens is when we render the HTML, the loading state is triggering the loading p tag here. So what we need to do is await for the list to be in the document. So the way to do that is if we wrap this in an await and then wait for, and this comes from React testing library, and this has a callback in here. So await for, and all we need to do is move this into this block over here, and if we delete this space and now save, this test should now pass. As you can see, it is passing. So now that test is passing, we also want to check for the favorites list to be rendering now as well. So if we just copy this and underneath paste this in, and this time instead of trending destinations list, is going to be our favorites list, like so. And then we want to access the first index this time, so not the second index, should I say. And this time we will rename this to favorites list. So essentially we want to have two lists in our document. So now if I save, another test that we want to do is we want to check the initial text in our favorites list is the text of nothing is added to your list yet. So if we just copy this and underneath paste it in once more, and this test name will be renders the initial no favorites text. So that's the initial text that we render on our favorites card. like so. So all we need to do here is define a constant and in our await for, so this will be initial favorites text, and this will be screen dot get by text, like so. And then the text we want to grab is nothing added to your list yet. So if we just bring that in, and then we want to expect that this is in the document. So now that test has passed also. So now what we want to do is check to see if the correct flight list data is being rendered in the document. So I think Gwemborough was one of them, so we will access that one. So in here, I'm just going to name this as renders correct flight list data. And this is async. We render the destinations and then we await for this const of Gwemborough. So I'm just going to bring this in, and then we want to expect that to be in the document. So if I just copy this, bring this in here, and this is just to test that the relevant information is being passed in correctly. If I was to delete this and just render this out, this will now fail and it will tell me why it's failing. So if I hovered over, as you can see, there's nothing called Gwen error in the document, but there is Gwen Borough. So if I copy that, paste that in and save, we now are seeing that this is rendering correctly. And if I hover over here, this is not resolving, so I just need to resave again. And now the tests are passing. So we want to add one more test in here that tests the functionality of the buttons. So underneath here, this is where we will use the user event. So the last test is, so when we select a trending destination, then it gets added to our favorites list here. So what we want to do is we want to get access to Gwenborough. So we'll keep this example. And then when we click on Gwenborough, we want to then add this to our second list, so our favorites list. So if we have Gwenborough here, what I want to do is get Gwenborough and then click this. So user event dot click of Gwenborough, like so. And then what I want to do is get access to my favorites list. So that's this second list here. So if I just copy this one above and paste this in underneath. So const favorites list, screen get by all of the second list that we have. And then what we want to do is write an expectation in here. So expect our favorites list to have text content, and this should be the Gwenborough text content. So I'll just bring this in over here. Now, if I save, we should get an error here. The test will pass, but there is an error saying avoid using side effects within a wait for callback. So what we need to do is almost refactor this test over here. So what I'm going to do is move this above into the above block over here and remove this wait for here because it's saying don't use that. But then what we will have is an issue because the loading display will show. So now if I save, this test is now failing because the loader is showing. So now where I've declared my const of Gwemborough, what I now need to do is wait for Gwemborough to be rendered onto the page. So what I do here is something similar. So instead I want to await. So if I just bring this down, so inline await and then wait for, like so. And inline I want to do a callback in here. And now I want to get access to my screen.get by text here, like so. And this should fix the issue. But because it is async and we are using wait for, we shouldn't be using get by text, but it will suggest another one for us. So if I save and hover over it, so it says here prefer find by text query over get by text, and you can read this in React testing library docs. So all I'm going to do is change this. So find by text. Now if I save, I have no errors. And as you can see, the test is working. So with this final test, what happens is Initially, we are fetching data from the API, so therefore the loader is showing. We then need to access something in the list. For example, this is rendered out on the list from the API, so Gwembara. If we then click onto that, we then need to access our second list. And in our second list, so our favorites list, we then have the text content of Gwembara in here. So now just to test that this is working fine, I'm just going to delete the first character in here and add an E in instead. And now if I save, the test, as you can see, is now failing. It's telling me it's received Gwembra instead of what I've passed in here. So all we do is copy this and paste it in here like so. And now, as you can see, all of the tests are passing in our units and the project is now complete. I hope you enjoyed this build and learned a lot from this video. Please like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you soon.